How did you get into painting?
And so he brought me in, invited me to come in and kind of become partners with him to build his paint business. I left and started my own marketing business, but I was the technician, I was the designer, I was all the pieces. I'd never really heard of an MCA at that point, or at least called that. I just thought of it as a business loan or a line of credit or something to that effect.
And what are red flags that you would tell business owners who are being contacted about emerging cash events?
I would say the biggest red flag would be.
So I'm introducing Rob Paul Medea. He's the owner of True North Construction in Colorado. How you doing, brother?
Doing great. Doing great.
I'm gonna ask you one question. This is a question that my uncle asked me. If a midget walks up to you and says your hair smells good, is that sexual assault?
I think it probably would be.
He gave me that joke on Thursday. I was like, yo. And I had to think about it. What age did you start working?
My first job was I was 17, probably. Yeah, I was a bag boy at a grocery store, long time ago.
What other jobs did you do?
Really, that was my first job, and I worked that until I went to college. Came back and did that a little bit, even between semesters, between years. My next job was working at a retail store that sold skatewear and stuff like that. We sold skateboards and things like that. So that was back in the 80s. And I worked at a mall, and I was an assistant manager at a retail establishment back in that day.
When did you get into construction?
Oh, well, that was way down from that. I mean, I went to college for engineering. I was a mechanical engineering degree. So that's what I went to college for. And went to college in the 80s and graduated and got my first job working for a company that built architectural fountains for all kinds of things, mostly hospitality. We built a lot of fountains for Disney World. This was in Atlanta, Georgia, so we did a lot of Disney World fountains and things like that. So it was kind of an interesting, somewhat creative job, fun job, but I used my engineering degree and my mechanical degree there to did everything from size pumps to water lines to things like that. So it was kind of the beginning of doing a lot of like process piping and things like that I did for years after that.
So you graduated from college, you got an engineering degree.
Yep.
And then you jumped into pumping.
Yeah, this was, being an architectural fountain company, we were pushing water around, right? So it was a lot of that kind of thing of sizing all of the equipment and things that we needed for that, and overseeing that. That's when I learned how to use AutoCAD for the first time.
What is that?
AutoCAD is still around, and it's a CAD-based computer-aided design program that you would use to produce the drawings that you would use then to build the things that we were building. So when I was in college, we were still doing everything by hand, still drafting everything with pencils and T-squares and all that kind of great stuff. And this first job I had introduced me to that, and that kind of introduced me to computers for the first time too. So this would have been 1988, long time ago, well before a lot of you guys were probably born. So, and that's where I started in that company. And then I was there for a period of time, and then I left for a better paying job, like you kind of do when you're at that age. And
how did you find the better paying job?
Through another friend, somebody who had gone to another position at another company, and this was a company that built boilers, and that's where I kind of got pigeonholed for a while. Was in companies that built boilers. So we built steam boilers for pulp and paper mills and things like that. A very unsexy kind of thing, And I kind of got into that whole process piping of that, and used the same skills that I had from the first business, and kind of went into that, and that's what I did that for 5 or 6 years, and I bounced around to a couple of different companies that did the same things. And again, continuing with AutoCAD, and so I was kind of like a mechanical designer was what I was at that time.
How did you jump into the .com era? Instead of walking away from it, how did you embrace it?
Well, after being in the jobs that I'd been in for that period of time from like 88 until about 95, I realized that I wanted something more creative because I had a real creative background, a creative bent. I kind of wanted to be an architect, and I kind of went back to school to try to do that for a little while. And one thing or another led to me not finishing that. And I took an opportunity and decided to go to art school. So I went to art school in 1995 in Atlanta, a place called the Art Institute of Atlanta. They had them in different places around the country, I think. And what that at that time they called multimedia design, which was really early on, doing design work, and 3D animation was the hot thing right then. So that was when the very first Toy Story came out, if you remember that movie at all. And that was like a big deal because it was 3D animation for the first time. And so that's what led me into that world, wanting to get into something more creative. And through that process, I ended up meeting some different instructors and who had side businesses who did graphic design and things like that. And they saw something in me with that because I was also a little older than a lot of the kids who started at that time. I was 30 years old, I think, when I jumped into art school. And so they started giving me freelance projects. And so I started freelancing as a graphic designer and also as kind of like a developer, an early on developer, doing we used to build CD-ROMs back in that day. That's way before anybody's time. So back then you'd get a CD-ROM with a program on it, stick it in your computer, and then play some sort of a multimedia sort of thing. So I did all that kind of stuff. And through that process, a couple of years of that freelancing, I fell in with a couple other guys. One was my first real business mentor, and I think he was in his 50s at the time. And myself and another guy who were more on the technical side, we joined him. We started our first company in 1997. So I've kind of been in business since 1997 in some form or fashion. So that was the first business that we ever started. And we were in Atlanta, Georgia, and we were what you would call kind of a web boutique at that time. So it was fairly early on of the web, and I taught myself how to code HTML and all that kind of stuff. And so we did work for lots of big companies, Bell South, UPS, Home Depot. All those people were located in Atlanta, Coca-Cola eventually. And so that was my first foray into business and learning how business worked from my mentor, who really taught me a lot of that. And he'd been in business himself for most of his adult life as well.
How did you get into painting? What brought you into owning a painting
Well, that
company?
was way on down from there because I continued in that world for many years. I ended up becoming a creative director for an agency in Atlanta for several years in the early 2000s. And again, doing work for a lot of really big companies. And we did video work. We did a lot of stuff like that. We did a lot of ad work, things like that in the digital realm. What led me to getting into painting was there was a whole period of time in my life that I kind of call the lost decades. It's like family changes, older parents passing away, unexpected deaths, and things that just really changed the dynamic of the family over a course of a decade. And while I was in Colorado, after being in Colorado for a little bit, I met a guy who was a painter, and he was looking for help. He was looking for somebody to help him on the marketing side, but he also knew my background after I told him my history as an engineer and what I'd done in business and that sort of thing. So he brought me in, invited me to come in and kind of become partners with him to build his paint business, which I did for about 2.5 years, and learned the business inside and out from that, and was able to help him grow that from really nothing to, our first year was like 800,000. Our second year was about 1.2 in revenue, 1.2 million in revenue, and but it just wasn't working out as us as partners. And so beginning of 2018 is when I left and just started True North. And so that's how True North became. And I had learned the skills of the trade businesses from that and from being in that process. So that's where I just transitioned into True North. and then the rest is history. That's where we are today. So today, we've been in business since 2018.
What's the biggest challenge that you face in your industry?
The biggest challenge is probably working in a trade that is not very structured and not very systematized at all. It basically is a little bit fly by the seat of your pants for a lot of the people who are in the painting industry, at least. And you've got a wide range of people from just the crew with a truck who has some pumps, who know how to paint and can go out and sell services, to the larger companies, and the ones like we're trying to be more of is a structured subcontractor, specialty finishes, working with GCs, working on contract level with things like that. So we're doing something a lot different, a lot more put together system wise.
Okay. So the lack of systems is the issue that you're facing with your business.
That's part of it, yeah, and just the perception of it. So the perception of painting in a lot of ways is on the lower tier of the trade world, let's say. So we're trying to elevate that and trying to make that a little bit more, get a little more respect, I guess you might say, from some of the general contractors out there and the people that are out there. So, and we also do a lot of residential work, but we do residential, we do commercial, we do stuff for homeowners, also for like building owners, property managers, things like that too. So,
what jobs would you prefer to get, residential or commercial overall?
I think overall the commercial is still kind of like the big stuff. You want to do the big projects, you want to see yourself attached to that, but that's also the hardest to do, way harder.
How so?
Well, that plays into everything that we're talking about. It's all about money. It's all about cash, because when you're doing the larger work, you're also outlaying large sums of money for making that work. And in the GC world, the way construction works, you're getting paid 30 to 60 days down the road from whenever you do the work. So if you don't have the bank account or the cash flow to absorb that, all of the payroll and the supplies and all the things that go along with that during that time period, you start getting yourself into kind of a cash crunch, and that's the hard part about doing the commercial. Plus, you're also dealing with GCs that are much more attached to contracts and process and exhibits and submittals and all the things that go along with that. So there's a whole nother little area of things you have to provide when you're working for a GC as opposed to just a homeowner.
What's the largest obstacle that you've faced owning your business?
Largest obstacle, it probably goes back to, again, a lot of it has to do with cash on hand to do things. It also has to do with knowing your numbers throughout the whole process. Also, there's all the different pieces, right? From marketing and sales to the operations to the financial side. All those pieces are very important. So on the commercial side, the sales are a little bit different because it's more of like word of mouth and connecting to GCs. And there are lots of different methods out there for doing it that are a little easier. For homeowners, it's, real traditional marketing, Facebook ads, things like that. So you're spending money there to acquire that customer. Commercial's a little different. But I would still say that the biggest obstacle of growing is cash, is having that revenue when you need it. The systems, again, putting those in place, that's what we're trying to do too, is we're taking stuff that was maybe fly by the seat of your pants for some people to much more systematized, much more put into a structure, so that, because I'm building something where my goal is to be able to have it run without me. I'm trying to build a business that's a true, entrepreneurial sort of business where I'm not dependent on myself being there to do this. I'm not a painter, never have been. So I think that's actually an advantage in what we're doing, because that way I'm not sucked into the technical side of it. I'm worried more about the business side of it, which I think helps.
So Since 2018, you're going on your 9th year in business. What's a moment where like it really hit and you may have questioned, should I keep going? And you kept going and now you're here. One of those moments.
As a hard point, so that first multifamily job we ever did was the first time we did something this big. It was our biggest job ever. It was the same thing I'm talking about. We're working for an owner that paid 60 plus days out, and you're having to come up with all this money to keep everything running. And so that was a very tricky time period, and a time period that was, a time when he thought, should I be doing this? Should this be the path that I'm picking? It's not an easy path. It's not the easiest type of business to own. I think the whole model for the way construction works is very,
This scenario
very
though that you just described, when was this? What year was that?
That was in 2024.
2024. And how did you get through it? What made you decide, you know what, let me push through, keep going?
Well, two things. I mean, like, for me, it's like there's never a don't do it or don't or stop. Like I don't have a we can't do that kind of button. So it's like whatever we have to do to make it get through it, we have to do that. So there's no real we're gonna fail. So I don't ever think that way. I try to make it where we'll figure out a way to do it. Somehow it's gonna happen.
How did you figure out how to do it?
in that particular instance, that was probably when I got my first MCA. Was around that time when I knew that I needed, because what we're always looking at with, say, something like the cash flow. I have a cash flow tracker that I track everything through. If I see holes coming up and I can see that but I also see that I've got money sitting out here that now I need to get it from being a month away or 2 months away. I need it now. So what's the tool, what's the lever that I can pull to try to bring that forward, and you can't always do that with the GC. You can't go to them and say, I need the money now. They're just going to tell you, well, it doesn't work that way, and we don't have it, so we can't give it to you. So, that becomes, okay, how am I going to make that happen? And that's what led me to doing my first MCA. So I've been through many times where there's been like, should I, am I doing the right thing? But I always just let that sit. I pray about it. God's been good to me and he keeps me moving forward. And I just rely on the fact that, he's going to produce good out of anything bad. That eventually it's going to come together. And that always seems to happen. Whenever I think something's going to happen, it happens. And so you just got to keep believing that. And I think if you're somebody who just takes all that pressure onto yourself, that you're the problem or that then you probably won't really make it as an entrepreneur. You'll give up, but you'd have to. One of the things I learned from my first business mentor that I talked about earlier, one of the things he used to say was, the minute that you give up is when you're going to be successful. And I always lived by that because it's like, we did the same thing growing that business. It started out with the three of us, and in a couple of years we were 15 people. We were doing almost $2 million in revenue that was in the 90s during the .com. And we had the pressures of all of that, but it was like, the minute you think that you're gonna fail, that you're just on the other side of that is where it's gonna be successful. So that's how I've always kind of looked at it. That's how we always kind of pushed forward.
It's a nice mindset.
Yeah.
Because if you make it through that, it's pretty golden after that.
Yeah.
It's getting to those tough battles.
And here's the other thing though too, I think about business and about entrepreneurship is that it's probably not something you want to wish on anybody necessarily, because you got to have the mindset that you're going to make it somehow. But because if you're somebody who's risk averse or has to have all the comforts of home all the time, or has to be not worrying about it, that's probably not the right thing for you, because it's hard. It's a very hard thing to do. It's much harder to be an entrepreneur, I think, than it is to go get a 9-to-5 job and be a W-2 employee and work for somebody, because there's so many obstacles and so many things that you're going to face But you just have to have that belief in yourself that you're gonna get through it somehow. So
Yeah, it's you only bring home what you kill. It's
right.
like hunting.
Yeah,
And if you don't
true.
bring anything home, you don't eat.
That's true.
So
too.
it is on you.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you would tell young men who want to start a business?
Okay. Well, first thing I would say is that, and we talked about this before, like being like in the trade business. If you're in the trades and you're a plumber or HVAC guy, electrician, whatever, and you're the technician, that's really great. And it's great to have that background. But what I would tell them is that the minute you decide that you're going to have a business, start working on that at that moment of how do I not become a technician anymore. You don't want to be the electrician guy who has an electrician business and he's out there every day at the house pulling wires and putting in outlets, because you can't build a business working in your business. You need to be working on your business. I'm sure people have heard that saying many, many times, and it's really true, because I experienced this back when I was in the creative world, because I was trying after I was a period of time that I was the creative director, I left and started my own marketing business. But I was the technician, I was the designer, I was all the pieces. And so you're constantly working yourself out of a job because you're not out selling, you're not out building the business the way that you want to build the business. You're just worried about doing the job you're doing right now. So it's the same thing with somebody in a trade. If you're the guy hanging, putting up the wires or doing the plumbing or whatever it is, figure out how you can start out that way, but how quickly you can move yourself away from that, managing the business, finding more work, all of that sort of stuff. So I would say that's my advice to somebody who wants to start a business out of the trades. And also just to know more about business. You may know everything about plumbing, but you need to know about business too. You need to know your numbers. You need to know, what a P&L is and how it works, and know your margins, and know how much you have to actually charge for something to pay a technician, buy the part, and still come out with enough money to cover your overhead and make some profit at the end of it all. It's a lot more than you think it is.
That's good advice. What lesson have you learned trying to balance family life and business life?
Well, I'll say this, business will completely take everything you'll give it, right? So it's not going to say no. It's never going to say, I've had enough, go do something else. You're always going to be wanting to work on the business. And a lot of people might just have a job that they're very passionate about, and they could do the same thing, be a workaholic and just devote all their time to that and neglect the family. So I would say, through my experience, and I've been on all of the sides of that, is that you need to try to figure out how to balance that and create some days of the week that, on this day we're not going to do anything for business. It's all family, or it's all this, and every family is going to be a little different depending upon the stage of life, whether you've got a wife and young kids, or if you're a little bit older, or the kids are gone, and whatever it is. But I think the other thing too with that is to try to not make it where, if I do take some time off, that you're going to beat yourself up like, I should have spent more time doing this, whatever. Especially if you're a business owner, take that time, because you know what, it's still going to be there when you get back. That couple of extra hours you might have spent probably isn't going to push the ball that much further forward than it would to spend some time with the people that you love and that love you. So try to be cognizant of that. And that's the thing too, of enjoying having a business. One of the things that's good about having a business is to give yourself some flexibility. I think a lot of people start businesses because they feel like, oh, I'll be my own boss. I can decide when I want to work and when I don't want to work, and that it's that way to a certain degree, but that's not always the best way to work at it.
So right now, what fuels you to wake up and take on the day?
Well, okay. I think, but for one thing, I'm just a person who's endlessly curious about life and where it's going. Even at my stage of my career, I've been out in the workforce since the late 80s, right? So I'm 62. I'm building this business now. Part of the reason I push really hard with it too is I have a 22-year-old son who is now come in and is going to be part of the business as well. And I'm building it for him in some regards as a legacy for that. But really, I'm just excited about the possibilities that every day kind of brings, because there's always something new to do, something new to learn. Even right now, with the way AI is pushing everything forward, I see a whole new outlook with that. And so there's never, people my age usually are like looking for retirement. It's like, I'm going to retire in a couple of years. And I know people that are like that. And I have friends who've retired, and I kind of sometimes am jealous of them that they've retired already. But I'm not really ready for that yet. So I think what keeps me going is just because every day's a new day and there's always new things. And sometimes the pressures of the business will get to you and you wish you could, but you keep right on going, move right forward.
So you said you kind of actually answered this.
Yeah,
one.
I kind of answered some of
these.
these.
You took your first merchant cash advance in 2024.
Yeah.
Why did you take that first merchant cash advance?
Well, the whole reason for taking that first one was what we said earlier, was because we were at a cash flow crunch. We were at a point where we had outlaid a couple $100,000 in materials and labor, and we were looking at the cash flow and seeing that money wasn't going to come in until another 30 to 60 days down the road. So what do you do? I think I looked at a couple of different options. I'd never really heard of an MCA at that point, or at least called that. I just thought of it as a business loan or a line of credit or something to that effect. And I looked for that sort of stuff too, and that's what kind of led down the road to the term MCA. So I was looking for business loans. I was looking for a line of credit. And the MCA kind of popped up in that as a way to get something that was unsecured, that you could get very quickly, which really helps in that regard when you're looking at like, I need this money before the end of the week or we're in trouble. That was what was nice about that. So using it strategically is the right way to look at it. You have to look at your numbers. You have to know that down the road I have the ability to pay this off the way that it's structured, because it can be pretty daunting when you look at a weekly payment coming out and things like that. So knowing your numbers, knowing your margins, and knowing where you're headed with it can make it a tool that you can use.
The first time you took it, what was the amount?
Gosh, I think the first time I took one was like $70K, something like that, something around there.
And that was able to bridge the gap for you?
Yes. Yeah, immediately helped with, suppliers, mainly with labor that was, screaming that we need to get paid, kind of thing. And that was the immediate need for that. So we used it to make sure that our workforce was still, getting paid and moving forward. And then some of it was also supplies, things like that.
How was the merchant cash advance introduced to you? When someone called you up, I'm assuming, how did they break it down to you?
I'm trying to think of the first one. The first one I got was not with you. It was with somebody else, and I don't remember the name of the company exactly. But it was, it was basically broken down as to say, here's what we can fund you, here's the payback terms of that, and it's going to be this many weeks and this kind of thing. It was pretty straightforward. But it was really like, that was kind of it. It was like, here's the lump sum of what the whole things are, and what do you want to do? It was like kind of left to you of like understanding how this really worked with the business, how it really played out. And so making that decision about it, you didn't really maybe have all the information that you probably wanted to have right off the bat. Had to ask a lot of questions.
When you asked the questions, did they answer them? Well, what answers did they give you?
Yeah, I mean, the answers were good. The answers were pretty straightforward. I think on that first one, I knew pretty much what I was getting. I knew what I was getting into and what it was going to entail. But I didn't really get a sense whether or not the interest rate was the right rate. There was some things sometimes where they'll play with the APR and with this and that, so it kind of looks like it's a lower percentage, but it's actually a much higher percentage when you really sit down and run the numbers on it. So you had to be kind of careful with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because they may say APR interest rate, but it's actually a factor rate.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
something that's not always explained. So if you take $100 and the factor rate is a 3.5, you're paying $35
Yeah.
on that $100.
Yeah, which is 35%.
How has your experience been dealing with the people in the merchant cash advance industry?
I would say overall, it's been fine. You know, it's been okay. There are certain ones that I've talked with that it's more about just kind of making the sale and pushing through with it. You know, and then there's, you know, like working with you, it's been much more about, you know, making a long-term relationship, looking at my business from a little bit different point of view, like what do you really need? What is this really going to be for? How are you going to use it? Helping make that decision a little easier so that you're either not taking too much or not are taking you know, enough for what you have to do. So I think building that relationship over time, none of the other MCA people that I've talked to really have done anything like that the way that you have. So that would be the biggest difference in that regard.
Appreciate that. I know when I looked at your statements, I think it was a year ago or a year and a half ago, you had a reverse consolidation in your account.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the reverse?
Yeah. After I did it, it was the wrong thing to do. And it wasn't explained really well about how it was going to work. The main objective, what happened with that was that, yes, it cut down my weekly cash flow that had to go out, which helped. But what wasn't really explained really well was that at the end of it, when I decided to turn it off, that all of that money that had been saved was basically due at that moment. And so therefore, here we are down at a point where, yes, I'm ready to turn that off and I think we're okay, but I've got to go pull out $25,000 right now to pay this off to get this, you know, like, which was, when you looked at it, it was a big interest just to save, you know, $1,000 a week on some cash flow items. So it was probably the wrong thing to do. And now that I know the way that is kind of structured and the way it works, I would never do it again.
Yeah, that's the thing with reverses. They're usually sold incorrectly. A reverse, the only time it should ever be used is if you're stacked up to the gills and you can't really make the payments.
Yeah.
That's when you lower the payments because they're putting the deposit in.
Yeah.
And then on the back end, fine, you'll pay that interest. But a lot of people, they're in scenarios where it's not killing them.
Right.
And they just took a reverse, and now they owe all this interest for 6 months, sometimes 12 months on the back end.
Yeah, because and when you calculate that out, really that interest it's very high. It's like I can't tell you what it is right now, but I imagine it's in the 40% range. You know, so it's a big hit. And like I said, it's not really explained 100% of how that really works when you do that. So.
Yeah, personally, not a fan of it unless you're, as a business owner, unless it's basically something needs to change or tomorrow I'm done, fine, take a reverse.
Yeah.
But if there are other options, never take a reverse because now you're just taking a ton of interest. Were you ever advised to stack merchant cash advances?
No, I don't think I've ever was like advised you should stack them together. You know, I have had as many as 3 at a time, you know, for one reason or another, based on, again, cash flow, based on needs for the business at that time. And I would tell people that if you can avoid that, I probably would try to do that, just because it starts to really stack up. And when you look at the amount of money that's coming out of your account every week, it's draining it really very fast. So you have to have the ability to absorb that. So I would suggest to stay away from that if at all possible.
So you started taking merchant cash advances in 2024.
Yeah.
Approximately how many merchant cash advances do you take a year?
Well, I was thinking about that earlier. I think since I started in 24, I've probably taken 6 or 7, and each one has been paid off. So it's either run out its whole course and paid off, or paid off early. A couple of times we've consolidated some, but it's all been, they've all been paid off. So I've had like 7 of them, I think, so far.
Since 2024?
Since 24, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in 2 years.
And what are red flags that you would tell business owners who are being contacted about a merchant cash advance?
I would say the biggest red flag would be if they're telling you that, giving you some weird number on the interest, telling you it's something really small, and they're not giving you like a factor like we talked about, really spelling that all out. If they look at everything and they say you've already got all these, you just need to stack another one on top of it, I would stay away from that. And really just would come down to like how much are they invested in helping you grow your, make your business work and grow your business, or are they just trying to sell you, some money? So, and that just comes down to the person you're talking to on the phone and how they approach it.
How do you think people can kind of figure out the person on the phone is serving their best interest as a business owner?
Well, I would say, first off, not being too pushy about the whole thing. Not like we have to do it now. There's no time limit on it. There's no like, you got to do it this week or we can't do it or anything to that effect. So I would just, use your typical sense that you would about anybody trying to sell you something. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if they're wanting it to done right now, today, I can get it for you today, kind of thing, which they probably can get it for you today, but it doesn't mean that, that doesn't need to be why you should get it. You need to understand all the ins and outs, and they should probably be somebody who probably asks you enough questions about your business so they can kind of gauge, is this even the right tool for this person, and not just let me sell them an MCA.
Rob,
Something to that.
appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming out here.
Oh, no problem.